My name I have been introduced already, so sorry for the delay. I was on a call with ADG. So I'm talking about the ICD-11 here to give you a brief introduction, and you already see here on the screen that I'm showing a QR code and no longer a book, because ICD-11 is really an electronic product that you actually can access online with all its features at this address that I'm giving, icd.who.int. Now, the legal basis of ICD is essentially, it starts with the WHO Constitution that talks about nomenclature regulations, and they have been updated since regular rates. And last, when we had our adoption of ICD-11. ICD is this international standard for recording and reporting mortality and morbidity nationally and internationally, and in order to ensure semantic interoperability. Of course, when the nomenclature regulations were made, this term semantic interoperability wasn't known, so they were talking about comparable data and statistics, but it comes to the same. And with the most recent version, and that's what I added here because that's what the nomenclature regulations say, so countries have to move on to the most recent version of ICD. Now, ICD is not alone. There is also a family of classifications, and the World Health Assembly has reiterated in 2019 that this should be further expanded and developed and implemented as other areas beyond disease are also to be promoted. So what is this classification of diseases used for? Many of you may know that it's been using for cause of death somewhere. What people don't know, that there have been tons of de facto uses that we looked into when we were developing the ICD-11 to make sure it's fit for purpose. So instead of having an index as a separate book, we have integrated in a deep hierarchy all clinical terms. So now you can document in high detail clinical terms, records, and also use it in surveillance. Many indicators are already in ICD-11. You can do functioning assessment with the WHO disability assessment scheme that has been incorporated, so a unique number calculated from a set of functioning topics so that you can really track whether people can do things that they want and need to do in their daily life. We can document the level of detail that you need in primary care. ICD-10 had shortcomings there. It was a nightmare to use it in primary care. With 11, this nightmare is solved. We are able to do patient safety documentation to the level of depth that you desire. We can document drug safety, device safety, prevention, and of course, many people are interested in this documentation necessary for case mix and resource allocation. I just say DRG, diagnosis-related groupings. And of course, ICD has the features for cancer registration, injury, and research. Now, we have a super high level of detail in the depth of ICD. This is not for everybody's use. This is also for research use. So for example, somebody who wants to monitor rare diseases will find the detail in ICD, but not at the surface. That may be the one that low resource users may use, but more in depth where higher end environments may find their happiness. Now, ICD, as I said, is not alone. We have a family of classifications and terminologies that consists of the ICD, that's the most prominent. Then we have the ICF, that's a functioning classification, functioning disability and health is her full name. And we have the ICHI, that's the International Classification of Health Interventions, that covers medical interventions, all kinds of other clinical interventions, functioning interventions, up to the level of public health interventions in the format of prevention programs or special monitoring. All these special classification systems share what we call extension codes. So where, for example, you can add detail for specific medicaments or chemicals that were causing a problem or were used for a treatment, And you may know that WHO is the one that defines the non-proprietary names. So you may know many medicaments, and if you see in small, it says then the non-proprietary name. We have a WHO devices nomenclature that is growing now. We have the histopathology of tumors that is used in cancer registration. Of course, we have some anatomy. Then we have a lot of detail for external causes, so we can serve that research, and a lot of other aspects, including infectious agents. Related to this, to cover other areas or to have another look at the information, we have this classification of for nursing that looks at it from a nursing angle. Then we have the classification system that family practitioners had been designed to be able to aggregate coded data with another lens, but ICD covers this to a large extent, and ICHI as well. Then we have the medicaments, we have rare diseases, and we have some laboratory and other collaborations that you see there at the bottom that we will have linkages to. Now, we have classifications and terminologies means information and interoperability. And you see here the overall design of these three systems together serves population health, the clinical detail, administration, and reporting. And here we have the health records, surveillance, and death certificates as an input side. But if you look at it from a different angle, and I'm highlighting this angle because me, having been a practicing physician, having been forced to do coding and reporting to many sources, sometimes repeatedly the same information in different variants, this view is important. At the center, you may have a patient record or some documentation that relates to an individual that then can be used for many different uses. And you see here on one side, the blue ones is things that WHO does and many international agencies. The orange, blue, and light green ones are something that is more at the individual level and at the country level. And then you have all these other information systems that are connected to this. And furthermore, we are talking about big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and decision support. But we also have to be aware how clean is the information that we are having at the source. What can we do with these technologies and what can't we? And that's why, let's say, linking the classifications and terminologies together will be an important aspect. On the other hand, one also has to be aware that separate terminology systems are not so extremely helpful if for data analysis, for monitoring health and other things, if you don't have an internationally agreed aggregation logic. And on the other hand, nowadays, mere classification structure without an electronic index doesn't make sense. So in that, essentially, the old separation between classification and terminology doesn't hold anymore. And what we usually say is that if you want to document to a high level of detail and you want to use only one system, you can use the ICD and its siblings. If you want to have more advanced features, well, then you need to draw on other terminology systems that allow you to do some kind of reasoning and other things that you are keen on. Here we see now what is ICD-11. So I want to highlight that although it's classification of diseases, please see the full name, classification of diseases and health-related conditions. And this means that, of course, here in green in the upper corner, we see the traditional things that are part of ICD, and this included reasons for encounter or health status and external causes of illness. But we also have what things were doing when they fell sick. Where did people receive their injury? What exactly created that injury in detail? Who was the counterpart in the injury? And then for safety, for example, what's the mechanism of harm? Was it an overdosage or an underdosage? For infectious agents, we can document antimicrobial resistance and, well, the other elements. And I want to highlight here that we also have elements of traditional medicine that currently is based, module 1 is based on traditional medicine as practiced currently in China, Korea, and Japan. Both have some common roots in ancient China, and we are working on adding other modules of traditional medicine, but only what is highly systematic. And I need to highlight here, we're not talking about treatment, but we are talking about disease concepts. Now, here we see a screen. So we have this thing where we have the medical prosa, the reality, where we say we have a catarrhalic appendicitis with vascular injection of the tip of the appendix. Fantastic. But if we have this, we cannot process that information. And that's where we get into the ICD-11 and terminologies, where we essentially have acute appendicitis, eventually a little bit more refinement, and that serves to document this. And just on the right side, we show a little bit the level of information content that this would entail. So still here we are at 10 elevated 6 or so with terminologies and classifications. Luckily with ICD, we're able with code combinations to do this in an intelligent way, so we don't need that amount of terms in order to cover that level of detail of information for those who want that level of information. Those that don't want, they happily use ICD-11 at the level of the 4 characters, so anything that is before the decimal point, that will provide some very helpful, meaningful information already, and those who want more, well, they go more into depth. Now here this relevant detail again highlighted between ICD-10 and ICD-11. ICD-10 is just a set of categories, and that's where this stops. And that's why so many people invented additional systems that you can link to the ICD-10, resulting in a dictionary for mortality, in a dictionary for morbidity, a dictionary for drug monitoring. So all this kind of different dictionary. And now with ICD-11, you see we have, of course, still a hierarchical structure that serves this kind of analytical part, but below this red line, we have a lot of detail that can be used to document that detail and use it for different uses. That's all of this we call ICD-11 Foundation. And you see here the number of categories hasn't increased enormously, the statistical categories, but now we have, in addition to the categories, what we call entities. So these are all the dots that are part of the foundation. These are linked with 120,000 terms, and with the instructions, the logically embedded language-independent instructions that are part of the core of the ICD, you can code more than 1.6 terms automatically with our coding tool. And for the matters of combining codes and categories, well, there are no real limits to this. The most important thing is that ICD-11 has an integrated Google-style search, whereas ICD-10, well, you had to use the index, find the term, have a lot of training, and were essentially lost. And here we had a comparison that was done, I think 2 years ago by a team in Hopkins University, Professor Chute, that has had an analysis on clinical terms, comparing, in that case, the biggest terminology that is around, SNOMED-CT. Then the ICD-10-CM that you all know has been expanded to any incredible level of detail, and the ICD-11. And you can see that if it's about coverage of terminology and content, the ICD-11 is doing very well. And only in the other parts where it is about functioning and about interventions, of course, it falls short. But if you happily add the other sibling classifications, well, you are run equal with the other systems, with the difference that ICD-11 is free. Here you see the classification for those who are statisticians among you. It has a very traditional structure, so with external causes and all these other elements, maternal cases, neonatal cases. This has remained stable and invariant to not trouble the big statistics that are done with this and the general population. But what you see here in orange, that's all new. We have this new chapter of immune system and blood that has been split into these 2 chapters. We have a chapter for sleep and wake. We have sections for chronic forms of pain and antimicrobial resistance. We have a chapter on conditions relating to sexual health. We have this functioning thing. We have the extension codes, and we have traditional medicine, as you see, ancient Chinese roots, and we are working towards ancient India roots broadly. I put this in italic because this is still under development, so too early to put some final name. Here we see that the ICD-11 redesign has an impact on statistics. And here we just analyzed at the level of the chapters and the mortality data that is in WHO using the existing mappings from ICD-10 to ICD-11, respectively from ICD-11 to ICD-10. And you see here, for example, that under 04 in the first part, immune system, you now can see diseases that relate to the immune system. It's not a huge part of the deaths, but it's there. And in the past, it was merely invisible. And then you see here that the shift of the strokes that kill people that have been moved from the vascular system to the nervous system, so from 11 to 8, or from old numbering scheme 9 to 6, shows how this is a shift. And this is relevant because in the past, if somebody had a stroke, many people were just waiting and saying, yeah, okay, let's see what can happen. And in the past, I'm talking 30, 40, 50 years ago, but nowadays, if you have the possibility of doing rapid diagnostics, you can do several interventions that will prevent a person from the worst consequences of that stroke in many instances. Now, ICD-11 has links to and from it, and we looked at, for example, this maternal mortality ICD, and the hierarchies that are used for maternal mortality statistics have been embedded in the ICD-11, so one does not strictly need this other one anymore, and all the instructions that are in there about code combinations have become part of ICD-11, so those who are using still ICD-10, they have to use the ICD-10 for the analytical side, but those who are having ICD-11 will find the instructions already embedded. We have looked at national needs, so Australia, Canada, Germany, US, and Thailand, and I'm thinking if I'm missing some, and France, for example, to see a little bit what did they add to their ICD-10 to have that detail. We have embedded the histopathology of cancer, so in the future, so in 4 years, 5 years, cancer registries will move to ICD-11. We have used an advanced ontology structure, the Protégé browser of Stanford, for those who know this, to design the infrastructure of ICD-11 as a multi-hierarchy where every entity has a definition. We have WHO devices in external causes of injury, INN. So we have all these kind of links. And here you just see an outlook into the kind of the intestines of ICD-11, not to scare you, but to tell you what the structure is. You see here a multi-hierarchy. In the middle, sleep-related movement disorders that has multiple parents. One parent is gray, so that is the parent that is not used for statistics, whereas the blue one is the one that is used to design ICD and do real statistics there. And on the other hand, you see here these things that are below the sleep-related movement disorders that are blue, fully blue-filled entities. So these are the ones that get statistical codes. And then you have the other ones that have no individual codes that essentially are lumped together statistically into other specified. But for individual case documentation, they will still be necessary. And for example, here this propriospinal myoclonus at sleep onset in infancy is a rare disease. But if somebody wants to use this, they can use the unique resource identifier that is linked to every entity in the ICD-11 to retain that level of detail so that when there is an analysis, documentation, guidelines linked to this, well, you have the information at hand. And also below the surface now here, I show it from a different angle. We have here, let's say, a hierarchical view, and you see that, for example, every entity has some code that lumps together eventually several other entities that then are coded with the URIs, unique resource identifiers. However, the point is, what you see here, these complicated things, of course, they are supposed to be used in electronic environments because it's an extreme high level of detail, and it will be challenging to document this without electronic environments. We also have, of course, as you see, every entity defined with title, definition, classification, properties, post coordinations or code combinations, logical definitions, and all kinds of other elements that is part of what we call the content model of the ICD-11. The ICD-11 has an API that you can easily access through the central ICD-11 webpage, icd.who.int. And then you, on the left side, you will see something that relates you to the API, where you find all the detail, including software samples and and some environment where you can even play with the configuration and see what the API would provide. And it's HTTP-based REST API. We are working to have this somehow linked to FHIR. Also, FHIR uses a technology that requires downloading lists. And if you do that, of course, you lose all the coding features of ICD-11. And then you can use ICD-11, of course, also with an offline version. Currently, it's a containerized version that works with Docker. In the future, it may even work without a container and will be very lean, so you could even run it on any smartphone. This means that if you have an environment that has unstable internet or doesn't want to be connected to the internet, you can run the ICD services in a local network or on your local computer as you desire. Here you see just the API. So the core of the ICD is really language independent. That's the foundation. On top of this, we are putting a language specific layer. So with synonyms, spelling, normalization, declination, plurals, and other things. And on top of this then is the application interface that you can use for, well, the coding tool front end and the browser. That's what we're already doing. Or you link this to IRIS, that's a mortality system, or any other software. And Nenad will tell you more about software embedding that has already successfully happened with DHIS and OpenMRS. And here just another example of this foundation thing. So I'm a surgeon and I love special cases. Spigelian hernia is a special type of hernia that is in the body. And if you find one, you're really excited that you had a Spigelian hernia that you could treat. And on the other hand, statistically speaking, it's not so extremely relevant for analysis. And so this would be lumped together in other specified hernias. Now, using the URI, you see it here, we can do one thing. The system and the API can return to you that this code is DD5Y, other specified, and the title is other specified hernias. But below the surface, the entity this points to is the Spigelian hernia with said URI, so that when you have your health record, you can essentially document this DD5Y Spigelian hernia. In the background, you can retain the URI, so you always keep the source of this whole thing. That makes the clinician happy as well as the one that wants to use aggregated data. Content enhancement examples, well, we have stages of HIV, absolutely absent in ICD-10 and essential for modern presentation of the cases. We have the new definition of sepsis included. We have subtypes of melanoma and added the basalioma that were missing. We have the tumors with histopathology that regroup brain and blood tumors. We have pulmonary hypertension new structure, some new ways of distinguishing the severity of myocardial infarction. We have now the formally missing male infertility. Code combinations are used to add detail, but only what is relevant and required. For statisticians, they will be happy that, for example, land transport accidents at high level now are grouped by traffic, non-traffic. This prevents collecting the statistical data from several different places. Now it's part of the aggregation logic. And we have the disability assessment scheme. Inside, we can say ICD-11 is a classification of the 21st century, advanced knowledge representation with OWL, using ontological principles, multiple relationships, multiple dimensions. We have state-of-the-art software that is user-friendly, portable, small size for local and mobile use. It's scientifically up to date, and I show here this picture of a mobile phone. Nobody is worried to use a mobile phone because of the technology that is inside, or see the picture about the relationship about, I don't even know what I was looking for there. So highly complex logical relationships. But we're happy to use the outside of the phone with this feature that has user guidance, this Google style coding. We have this proposal platform that is public. So if you register, you can make proposals for amendments of ICD. The ICD-11 is multilingual. Go to the page, click on this globe sign, and you can switch to currently 4 languages and more are following. It's open access. The legal terms are in preparation. We will follow Creative Commons there, and you can use it offline and online. So that's what it is, ICD-11. It comes with a lot of technical support from WHO. It has electronic self-learning tool that is permanently amended. There is an implementation and transition guide. We have the translation tools for those who want to have special languages. We have maps from and to ICD-11 that are exposed online. And we have this coding tool that you can use standalone or technically embed into any software that you like. And we have already experience for many field trainings, where you can say 30 minutes training on how to use the coding tool, and you get 88% correct coding. That's the same level as an expert coder after 1 week of training with ICD-11. Thank you very much. So Nenad, over to you.
So in this presentation, just a little bit of follow-up on the tooling and implementation arrangements. So just to reiterate, like Robert already indicated, when we are talking about ICD use and implementation, it was basically talking about a book and disseminating a book. And for the users, of course, the coder was requested to code through the alphabetical index, which was volume 3. Now, in the context of ICD-11, as mentioned, we are using basically an electronic environment which is helping the coder to get from the raw diagnostic term to the correct ICD category. And the most prominent tool in that respect is the ICD-11 Coding Tool, which provides access to the classification, but has a very sophisticated search algorithm. And I will show you in more detail what this entails to actually do this kind of task. And that is for end user consumption. And as we heard in Robert's presentation, we have the same functionality also provided through the APIs. And on top of the APIs sits embedded coding tool. And this will, you will see it in some of the software applications we will show later how this looks in practice. So when we are talking about the coding tool, this is basically the kind of interface you will see. On the left-hand side, when you type in a search term, Google-like, you get a word list, which you can sort either by relevancy or also in alphabetical order of, you know, in a way, lead index terms in order to zoom into the specific area and narrow down the proposed categories which are coming up. And then you have in the middle the kind of suggested categories from which you can pick on. And on the right-hand side, the distribution of those by ICD-11 chapters. So you see here what the distribution looks like, how many relate to external causes, how many in infectious diseases, etc. And you also notice that there are specific other features and icons, which I come to in a moment. But that is the main kind of interface which you will see when you use the coding tool. Now, when we are talking about basic coding scenarios using the ICD-11 coding tool, you're basically looking at these 5 subtypes. So you will see that sometimes when you search with a term, it renders a blue highlighted stem code, just as you saw here with the cholera, which means that we are pretty sure that this is the correct code. In that case, cholera not otherwise specified. Sometimes you have also a situation where you get straight to a code combination, which consists of a stem code and possibly an extension codes or 2 stem codes together. Like, for example, we will see breast cancer with the anatomy or laterality, or you have, for example, diabetes with a complication with the stem and stem. And we started indexing them also, so that even if you type a more complex diagnostic statement into the coding tool, you will be getting straight to this code combination, and you don't do what is captured here under 3, a kind of manual post-coordination. Now, some of these, what we call post-coordination, or another term is code combination, is mandatory, so you have to do it, and therefore you will find next to the concept a red icon, which is indicating that for these type of concepts you have to post-coordinate. And there's usually also a green coding node attached that gives more information about why and how. And then there are stem codes with optional post-coordination, which you find represented with a gray icon. And for those areas where the search is not rendering an immediate kind of result, like you see under 1 to 4, you get the feedback and it says flexi search options, which is widening the search parameters. And from there, you then take it on. So let's quickly run through some of these examples. Here, the Hutchinson-Gilford syndrome, which is a very rare disease. You remember Robert's slides of the rare diseases, which are deep, deep in the hierarchy of the ICD-11. Actually, it's within the foundation, so it's one of these 120,000 terms somewhere deep down, but we can pull it up now. And you see here how statistically you would represent it under the syndromes of premature aging, but you find it there in the foundation and you can pull it up from the roots of the foundation. And it has also a blue highlighted background, so it's a full match. Another example here, the cancer with the indication of the laterality. And you see here, this is what I mentioned earlier, that in this case, you type in the diagnosis and you indicate laterality of, for example, anatomy, and you get straight to the correct code combination, which is the stem code for the malignant neoplasm of the breast. And you see here, breast cancer is an index term under this concept. And then the system also recognizes, okay, you used a value of laterality, which is right, and you have here the XK9K, which is the extension code for right. And it is separated by number sum, which is the used for extension codes. Extension codes cannot stand on their own, so they can only be represented in combination with a stem code. You also see here the example of a concept, the multiple drug resistant tuberculosis, where you of course need to code as well the infection. And this one requires in red the mandatory post-coordination, and you see also the green icon, which is indicating the coding, that there's a coding node available. And this is another example here. When you open it up, type 2 diabetes, retinopathy, or you can put any other complication like diabetic foot, you see that it requires post-coordination. But what you also notice here, the system is already doing it for you. So you type this in, and in this case, we have here an acronym which is used, T2DM, and the complication, and the coding tool is rendering you this code combination, which is representing the diabetic retinopathy with the respective type 2 diabetes. When we are now going through some of the other features which you find in the tooling, is that obviously, like you know it from Google, there's some kind of work completion. So you start typing and the system renders dynamically specific results as you move on and type out the term. You have, as I mentioned before, this kind of word suggestion on the left-hand side, which also can be used to narrow down the search. So then when you type in, for example, malignant, and you can then look by site or whatever you choose you want to focus on. As I said, it is done dynamically, and obviously in the background we are using some kind of matching score. So you will see that, for example, very frequently used concepts are coming up in the search more than less. So these kind of more sophisticated ways of helping you in getting to the correct suggestion list is there. There are a number of other features. That's why we call it smart search. So, for example, similar words are recognized if there are any kind of spelling variances between American or English. They are there and accounted for. We have also made use of what is called global word substitution lists. So we equate upfront renal with kidney or cancer with malignant neoplasm. So kind of hardwiring the system in the background, and other features which are there to make the search much more intuitive, as you used to have it also, for example, in the Google type of environment. Another important aspect is, and this becomes more and more important as we are also now starting to launch translations and finalizing translation, is that we can, of course, improve the index by including local term variations. We did this already in the English version. So, for example, in Australia, most of the physicians, you won't find the term stage 5 kidney disease, but what you will find in the death certificates is the term end-stage renal failure. So after we identified this through the analysis of death certificates, we incorporated these kind of local term variations in the index as a additional index or synonym or index term, and therefore we can account for these kind of local term variations. Another version which has been launched is the Spanish version. They, for example, they don't use the term in some Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America, suicide, because of the stigma. So they refer to auto-elimination, and that has been now also incorporated. And we are doing similar things now with the Arabic version, which is also online, to see if there are variances in terms of how it is used, for example, in Morocco versus in Egypt now, or in the Gulf states, that can be also accounted for. And that is something which, of course, is driven by the analysis of real-life data. So here you see an example which we got from the hospital in Zanzibar, a list from the hospital wards, but also from primary care centers, where we told them, please send us your raw terms as you find them in the medical record or in the death certificate, with their frequencies, so that we have also an understanding, and this is important information also for the search algorithm. This was then incorporated, and you see here and there, you'll find even gaps to make sure that the index is improved. In other cases, it is now covered. And that kind of helps us, of course, in terms of improving the index and including making it more complete and also more specific to the different use cases. And that is work which is going on, of course, in all other countries where we are doing implementation. More recently, we have also included an additional icon to highlight, for example, the fact if a particular concept is of relevance and importance in the context of maternal or perinatal coding in the ICD-10. For those of you who are coders, they know, statisticians, that there was a big problem of misclassification of any conditions which are related to pregnancies not correctly reported. This one is now covered now with by having this kind of flag indicated here, so that the coder has a kind of warning and is reminded that if you encounter this, please keep in mind that it's a different code in case it is related to a maternal case, and the same will be for perinatal conditions. Now, as I mentioned before, the browser is multilingual. We have it now already in Arabic, in Spanish, and Chinese is in the last stages, and other language versions are coming. And that will also then, of course, apply to the other infrastructure we have in terms of the coding tool, as well as the APIs, which will be multilingual as well. The coding tool itself has two versions. The blue version, which is the implementation version, we just released 3 weeks ago, the 2020 release version of ICD-11. And then we have the orange version, which is the development version, where you find the latest kind of new features in terms of technology and also in terms of concepts or new index terms incorporated. And based on that, we are releasing annual versions for implementation. There are a number of other tools which might be important also to highlight, especially in the context of implementation. One of them is the ICD-FIT, which is used for coding training and self-evaluation. And what is important to highlight is that this allows you to basically code terms which are selected and pre-coded so that the coder can immediately see how well he or she did vis-a-vis a gold standard. You see this here for a specific term like rheumatoid arthritis in the knees. And the platform also renders the coder an immediate performance score, indicating the accuracy of the coding when compared to the gold standard. And he or she is ranked with the peers who are participating in this kind of exercise at the national level, for example, for a particular country. And what we have seen so far in a number of trainings we have been conducting with many countries now is that thanks to the use of this kind of tools and the simplicity, the accuracy we get is quite good. And here are some results, for example, from training we did last year in Uganda, where we asked them to basically code their own terms and see what kind of results we get after 3 or 4 hours of basic training. And it is quite impressive, as you can see here, especially when you compare this with how the situation would have been if they would have used the old index in ICD-10 and using a kind of paper-based approach to this. So you really get high level of coding accuracy with minimum training. And that I think will be the kind of mantra also for the future in terms of making this more simple, more accurate and faster. So as we said, the tools are for end user consumption, the coding tool, the field implementation tool, ICD-FIT. I will come to the e-learning tool in a moment. There are other tools which we're using for development and maintenance and analysis. There's a proposal platform, a translation platform, and some analytical tools. And then Robert already mentioned the tools which are used for consuming the ICD-11 content and also search algorithm in software. These are the REST APIs we have. For the implementation part, we are basically going through a process of these different steps. Since the adoption of ICD-11 in May last year, we had over 100, I think 10 countries now familiarized in ICD-11, the focal points from the respective ministries of health. And since then, we have started in a number of countries with implementation preparations and piloting of the ICD-11 in software applications, what we call early adopter countries. And some of them already have started really scaling this up countrywide. And then, of course, this will be followed by system-wide implementation and routine reporting. As you may know, ICD-11 officially comes into effect like ICD-10 3 years after the adoption. So in case of ICD-11, this will be the 1st of January 2022. However, we already have, we will see countries moving earlier than this into implementation. And this is very encouraging, and we hope that, of course, others will follow. So what really is important to emphasize when we are talking about the implementation part is, of course, that the main way of implementing will be through software, through electronic applications. And obviously, it is very important to really take stock of what the situation is in a given country or setting vis-a-vis these kind of software applications. So what we see is, of course, that it is much easier if you have any kind of software, whether it's for mortality or morbidity, developed in-house, so that and if the competencies is to develop it is also in the country, as compared to a situation where proprietary software is used, and sometimes the expertise is coming also from outside, simply because the integration requires some modifications in the source code, and therefore access to the source code of the respective software is very important. Otherwise, the integration per se is very, very simple and straightforward. We have now experience from a number of countries, and we can really say that within a couple of days, any kind of experienced person who is familiar with his or her software environment can consume the APIs and the embedded coding tool in the application without any difficulty. Here's some examples. This is now from Uganda. They have incorporated now ICD-11 in the DHIS2 platform as an application, which they're going to use. For the first time, they created an electronic death certificate. And you see here, basically, the electronic form of the paper-based WHO death certificate from 2016. And what they did is for the frame A, the medical part 1, but 2, they embedded the APIs and the coding tool into these fields. So when you start typing, you pull up the coding tool as you have seen in the previous screenshots, and automatically you can select the code. They also build it in some smart ways of making sure that the user is given information when certain code ranges are presented there, so that you don't forget. For example, if you put here in the application only the injury, but you don't mention the external cause, and then you want to assign the underlying cause, the system will recognize that you forgot to put the external cause, as the external cause should be reported as underlying cause. And that the system prompts you with a reminder to make sure that this is not forgotten. So these kind of what we would call consistency checks are used also to improve the quality of the data entered. And of course, all this, like we heard before, is done Google-like search. So we don't have, and that is also important to emphasize, any kind of flat lists which are incorporated, like we have seen in some of the electronic applications of ICD-10. What they do, and this is not only them, but also other countries who are going through this process, is really through a requirement analysis, then they check the APIs and integrate the embedded coding tool, prototype development with some form of testing, but then most importantly, on-site piloting of this application in real-life settings, and then see how it can be scaled up. And in conjunction with this, the education and training is also conducted. This is another example from the UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, which is operating in the Palestinian refugee camps. They have an EMR system since 2009, which was the chief complaint, and then of course also the diagnosis at admission and discharge. So it's a very nice, poster child for the primary care application. And then there are other countries, like for example, Robert mentioned the OpenMRS integration, which is in case in Rwanda. This is an example from an Asian country where we started also exploring, and this will be the next step, looking into automated ways of coding with ICD-11 by really running terms against the search algorithm automatically and see what kind of matches we get. Here we had a term set with 3,346 terms, and you see here full matches 1,100. Then there were others where were one-to-many matches, which some of them were right or wrong. So that has to be then, of course, validated. But this will be very much, especially for those countries where we have the infrastructure, the way to go to see to which extent we can automate the process. and then focus the coding workforce on looking at the more problematic cases. Let me also end with mentioning that we have just recently been accepted to the WHO Academy, where we will develop an ICD-11 learning course, which will be launched in May next year during the World Health Assembly, which should be a state-of-the-art learning application and course for the ICD-11 and the different areas from mortality, morbidity coding to implementation management. What is unique in the context of the Academy, that for the first time we will be able also to issue certificates for this and micro-certification, what it is called. And for this, we might be quite interested in the context of implementation, country implementation, to really team up with regulatory authority, academic societies, or professional association, because the idea is for the Academy overall to have these certificates being recognized or even co-branded within a given country context. So this is something which is upcoming, and we are quite excited about this new opportunity, which we were always trying to push, but now it was not possible. But now, in the context of having the Academy established, this will be possible. Now, last but not least, some lessons learned so far. And I think that we really see for us in terms of implementation that working through all the 3 levels of the organization has been very critical to get as far as we are getting now. Country ownership is, of course, essential, both at the technical and political level, shared understanding of the ICD-10 problems and the solutions 11 can bring. I think one point which I would particularly highlight is the issue around the vendors or donor-trapped countries. We have seen now in a number of countries where some of the authorities have requested to move to 11 or to start piloting it. But the obstacle there is that some of these countries are caught up in contracts with certain vendors, which are still very much enshrined in their old ICD-10 business model, which sometimes also includes other terminology service providers, which makes it very, very difficult for them to make use of these innovations which are now there and which are there for free. So that is quite a challenge for some countries. That is one of the lessons learned. And I think in that context, it is really important that the other bullet point here, that implementation really is supported both from a digital health, but also from a information health perspective, and that these synergies have to really, or strategies have to be synergized and come together, otherwise it will be challenging. For some countries, particularly developing countries, we provided some seed funding to really get this process started, especially in non-legacy countries. Uganda, for example, is one example. There are others. And we can really see from the experience we had so far that with this investment, these non-legacy countries can make a leapfrog in terms of coverage and quality of ICD coded data, whether it's in the mortality.
Thank you, Dr. Nenad. Thank you, Dr. Jakob.
So I think that is
very
in a nutshell where we are vis-a-vis
webinar. I think
and
we didn't allocate enough time for this, given its importance. I'd like to ask for a few more of your minutes, so to answer some questions from the audience. We are very interested in the training. How soon can we offer the training to the AeHIN members, for example? Dr. Jakob, Dr. Nenad?
So we definitely can provide some training. We have made good experience with some kind of online training. Nenad has developed with a range of partners some training sets on a training platform, And so we can organize this. So next week we are very much taken because we have our Classifications and Terminologies network that has their annual meeting. But after that we'd be available so we can plan for this, and Nenad would be the focal point for this.
Thank you very much. We're already getting a lot of volunteers for the training course, so we'll organize that. And when we have enough people, Dr. Jakob, Dr. Nenad, we will let you know, and then maybe we can coordinate when this training can be done. Another question is, you mentioned in the last few slides, Dr. Nenad, about the seed funding for the countries. Now, some countries we know will need it, but some countries actually may be able to finance for themselves. How and what do they need to do to express official interest to use ICD-11? Over.
Yeah, I think if they can write to us, just expressing their interest, and that would be a good starting point. Obviously, we would be happy to, facilitate this implementation experience, and you're absolutely right. We would, I think, point them already. I saw in the chat people were pointing to the API site on the ICD website where they find detailed documentation. I think from a technical perspective, this is what we would certainly recommend already to do, to study that. And then in terms of, process-wise, we can guide them through some of the steps, which you also have seen in the slides outlined. And then in conjunction with the development of some kind of electronic tools, also organize training and familiarization sessions. And obviously we would like to have this well coordinated also with our, across the organization with our regional offices and the country office. But to really make sure that we use the synergies as much as possible. But we are very, open and would welcome this very much. So just let us know and we can then follow up on it.
Thank you, Dr. Nenad. There's a question that has been asked twice already on the chat box, is about procedure codes or procedure terminology. Is there something in ICD-11 for procedures?
So I sent a link on the platform, on the chat, that points to the platform. So we have the International Classification of Health Interventions. This is freshly developed, and while the public health part is still getting some fine-tuning, the clinical parts about what the clinical staff does is now completed and stable. At the moment, this classification is exposed only at the development platform. That's the link that I sent in the chat. But we have migrated already the content into the same core as ICD-11, so that it then can be accessed through the same API with a similar coding tool and everything like you know it from ICD-11. And when there will be language translations, they will be exposed the same way. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jakob. I think our part of the world, Asia, because we're not as contiguous as Europe and North and South America, we are more or less fragmented, so to speak, when it comes to terminology. So I think we're fresh. Our continent and our region is fresh for the ICD-11 implementation. Let me look at the other questions here. What would you suggest other countries that have already adopted another terminology set? I won't mention the name. What would be a migration path for them?
Well, there are two things. So if you adopt a terminology set, usually you know why you are doing this, because you have probably some very sophisticated use, or because you needed to bridge the, let's say, not so exciting ICD-10 coding things. So there are two ways. Either you wait until we have built links to other systems, or you can also say, okay, these are the things that we have documented, and we did this with other countries that didn't have any system at all. Say, please tell us what you are routinely documenting as terms, and then we can see to build the bridge just for these. We can batch process any numbers of, how to say, terms lines, And this means that we can provide extensive help, and then you can decide whether with what system you want to continue, but we can provide support for this. Over to you. We may need to leave because on the other call, they're already sending us messages. So if there is something very important, please send us a message, and then we are happy to address this if you would like in a second session. As I said, we make a technical IT webinar type, and we may do this kind of training because we are keen to have many people in the world being knowledgeable. So it's not just Nenad and me doing the trainings. Over to you.
Yes, doctor. Thank you very much. We will organize that. So we sum this up and end this for tonight, and we'll have another session soon with you. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.